As I begin, I want to express deepest gratitude to the Boston College Center for Human Rights and International Justice for providing me the opportunity and support in this experience. It has in many ways changed my heart and the way I see the world. Behind me is a Morningstar quilt sewn by a woman named Lou, whose kindness I still hold dear. My sincerest intent is to feature this most sacred object in order to showcase the beauty of Lakota culture. Finally, I will be using the terms Indian and Native American interchangeably, as those on the res consistently gave me permission to do so. One morning, early in my time on Pine Ridge, I drove through the drops of a driving rainstorm. I was traveling with a Lakota elder to pray at the site of the 1890 massacre at Wounded Knee. We arrived, and we strode up the hill to the mass burial site. It was here at Wounded Knee that his ancestors were slaughtered by Major Samuel Whiteside, commander of the U.S. 7th Cavalry. Whiteside surrounded the Lakota here in the area's Snake and Gully. Meanwhile, his men, their fingers coiled around new military test weapons called Hotchkiss guns, perched high in the hills above. His crew opened fire, the rapid-fire, revolving cannons cutting down over 300 unarmed Lakota, a large majority of them grandparents, women, and children. American soldiers eviscerated Lakota women sprawled and stacked on the snow. Left overnight, a blizzard froze the mangled dead in grotesque poses. 20 Congressional Medals of Honor were doled out to the 7th Cavalry, the most of any single battle in American history. More than World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. The late Lakota holy man Nicholas Black Elk, who witnessed the massacre, is translated in Black Elk Speaks morning. I can still see the butchered women and children lying heaped and scattered all along the crooked gulch, as plain as when I saw them with eyes still young. And I can see that something else died there in the bloody mud and was buried in the blizzard. A people's dream died there, and it was a beautiful dream. Atop the hill, my brother peered into the darkness of the sky, and his tears falling merged with rain as he said, "You only know what America tells you." There is great pain in this place, and visiting it has a way of making the past so present. An Ojibwe Indian, David Trower, writes in The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, "Wounded Knee is seen as the touchstone of Indian suffering, a benchmark of American brutality and a symbol of the end of Indian life, the end of the frontier, and the beginning of modern America. It stands as the denouement of Indian life, and where the Indian Vanishing Act to the poverty, squalor, and hopelessness of reservations, as D. Brown says in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, begins. This is what we tell. But I think this misses something. While this marks the final settling of the frontier was always moving and being shaped, even if it was no longer just geographic. Now, what Pine Ridge is today is an 150-year-long set of choices, many well-meaning, that have constructed an entire architecture of systematic oppression. Because of its vast area, the remoteness of living situations, and absence of any real public health services, validating statistics on the res is incredibly challenging. Some estimates gather that life expectancy for Pine Ridge's 40,000 or so residents hovers around 46 for men. This is the lowest life expectancy in all of America, on par with countries like Iraq and Somalia. Half of the tribe is 18 years or younger. Based on conservative estimates, 4,000 houses are needed to adequately shelter tribal members. Of the homes that do stand, many are mobile ones, and 1/3 of these have working electricity. Many go without running water, and those that do, they drink and bathe in the same water said to be rerouted through a northern border town's sewage line, a line tested over 120 times to be infested with dangerous levels of arsenic. Ogallala Lakota County has the lowest per capita income, $8,768, of any county in the United States of America. Unemployment hovers around 89%, and such little opportunity forces young Lakota to enlist in the military. Pine Ridge faces daily intergenerational cycles of poverty, abuse, and trauma. Cycles perpetuated in a history of, as Marx once said, self-selected circumstances circumstances existing already, given and transmitted from the past. Because the history of Native America and their lives today is largely unacknowledged or scattered in the apathetic sands of time, it is crucial to tell, understand, and lament these realities. They demand effective collaboration and respect to sovereignty and self-determination to address and overcome. Regardless, we can't help but hold the suffering and tend to it urgently. But I've realized that to focus so heavily on the difficulty is a way of telling that can be itself violent. It only perpetuates an accepted version of reality in the American mind. It renders the greatness of Lakota and Indian life behind them, not ahead. It erodes their control of their narrative and place in the world. To be Indian is not to be poor, it is not to suffer, it is not a long list of pain, and reservations are not graveyards of Indian lives and culture. They're a homeland for Indians, which, like anyone's hometown, can be good or it can be bad. But it is a base of togetherness, where city Indians return to and bring urban life, and where res Indians go from and bring the res with them. To resist narrating Indian life as a litany of loss opens one to walk with Indians in the act of living. We are so used to telling the stories of our lives and those of our tribes as a tragedy, Trower says, as a necessarily diminishing line. Once we were great, once we ruled everything, and now we rule nothing. Now we are ghosts that haunt the American mind, that we deprive ourselves of the life we yearn for, that the ways in which, I wonder, in which we tell the story of our reality, shapes that reality. And it is this way that this story is transmitted, and it has been so debilitating for tribes like the Lakota. While what is owed to them, legally, constitutionally, is seemingly unending, and it is, the Lakota have increasingly turned themselves away from clinging to what is rightfully owed. Through ceremony and inipis, which are sweat lodge ceremonies, Lakota elders recently challenged the young, asking, "How long are you going to let others decide the future for your children? Are you not warriors?" Lakota bravery, courage, hope, and resilience were flashing sparks of light, which I had the privilege to see up close. Sparks which will fan the flames of their future. They are investing anew in their vision, not the federal government's, and allowing themselves to dream a new dream for themselves. As the 2019 valedictorian of the Red Cloud Indian School said, quote, "Our vision has to be as big as the challenges we are facing." Henry Red Cloud, a fifth-generation direct descendant of Chief Red Cloud, who forced the American military front back hundreds of miles and also forced them to the treaty table to sign the Second Treaty of Fort Laramie, is one such visionary. He's combating climate change that has devastatingly affected the reservation in recent years of flooding and hail. He hopes to reforest the reservation, planting tens of thousands of windbreak and shade trees this year alone. He's also engineering cutting-edge solar power systems, off-grid solar furnaces, straw bale, sustainable housing, and wind turbines. His work has created reservation jobs and hope. When asked if he'd ever patent his innovative work, quote, "I'll never get it patented," he quipped. "Why should I? Here we share knowledge and use the gifts given to us by the Creator for his spiritual rebuilding." Another visionary is Nick Thielsen and his fellow Lakota at Thunder Valley Community Development Corporation, who are reimagining what community on the reservation will look like in ways that reflect Lakota cultural values. Their ambitions are radical, but not to them. 100% water reclamation, 100% energy generation, and 30 to 35% of food being grown on site. Against every sort of depredation and assault, Lakota culture has endured and survived, and Nick and his team are revivifying the relationality and connectedness that animates how the Lakota have always seen themselves bound up in the sacredness of the created world. In so doing, he believes he is transforming his tribe's relationship with the federal government. They're now asking, he says, quote, "How can this government work better for our people and for our future?" The effect of which, he thinks, will have a broad, quote, "profound impact on how federal resources enter into any low-income community. Just as Indians like the Lakota are striving to serve themselves anew, so too can indigenous teachings not just serve modernity, but guide it. The Lakota organized an entire culture, spirituality, and social ethic off of connectedness to the Creator, the created world, and each other. It's this kind of indigenous relationality that just might aid humanity in healing this increasingly fractured world. Wahan Tanka, the Great Spirit in Lakota, is moving on the res. From the perspective of Indians having adapted and endured by bringing the past into the future, only then can one see Indian history and its present for what it is, which is really, in the end, to see how power itself operates. Native American history brings into focus the kind of country we've created, and whether or not, or to what degree, we are really free. America, I believe, loses narrative power in ignoring Indian affairs and the legacy of a post-genocidal society. The very racial narrative that haunts this country, the what that killed Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd, originated in the oppression of Native peoples. It was what initially rendered slavery tolerable. As Kelly Brown Douglas traces in Stand Your Ground, racial terror that victimized what whites saw as the savage Indian was very much a blueprint for the same post-bellum racial terror and subsequent criminalization of the black body that has restricted generations upon generations of African Americans from equally accessing justice. In fact, both the history of African and Native Americans both reveals how oppression has a chameleon character to transform into different iterations throughout history. They in fact are intertwined and often worked in concert and simultaneously. To this day, the narrative of white American racial inequality has found in the person of color a place where its unjust ideology has and can be theologically, civically, and legally legitimated. And so we need to understand how, though government-endorsed and largely Christian-run Indian boarding schools traumatized Indian personhood, severed families, erased tribal languages, and ultimately eroded Indian culture, or how allotment systemized poverty and disenfranchisement, lopping off fertile reservation lands to white homesteaders, ranchers, and developers, and not to mention how it catalyzed racial determinations of who was Indian and who was not. It is this same blood quantum metric which continues to be socially divisive and consolidates who gets profits from annuities or casinos and who doesn't. Or how the Indian offenses, in hopes of keeping law and order on reservations, policed and criminalized ceremonial life, or maybe more to the point, criminalized being Indian. But yet Indians endured this middle passage, and on the other side of this brutality were relentless new survival modes that assured Indians weren't merely relegated to history. In fact, Indian assertions to be themselves, to be Indian, situated them against every coercive American effort in the much wider historical process of this country. So we need to understand that battling their way out of assimilation, allotment taught Indians how private enterprise and ownership operated in American capitalism, empowering them to resist as long as they could the Termination Act in 1953. Meanwhile, relocation in 56 pushed Indians from the reservation to the city. They joined African Americans in the Great Migration, and Indians too were homeless immigrants, running into segregation, redlining, and poor education. Moreover, as America questioned the validity of its self-generated exceptionalism during the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War, the American Indian movement also rose up, and even with their antics, revitalized and dignified Indian life. And by the 70s and 80s, a flurry of legal activity, especially that of Bryan v. Itasca, unworked termination and reasserted Indian sovereignty, shucking off state oversight and regulation of sovereign tribal nations. The resilient struggle for rightful sovereignty has seen Indians into the 21st century, and their resourcefulness has preserved the dignity of being red. Sovereignty, though a legal concept, is what animates Indian ways of life and allows their once denigrated cultures to breathe in their beauty. They fought our wars, moved in our migrations, shaped our modern Supreme Court, and repeatedly asked what kind of country we want ourselves to be. Indians remain. This, more than anything, we must tell. In the end, reservations to this day undoubtedly present grave human rights challenges. Access to water, access to health care, employment, to just name a few. But as one considers these, and as I look back on my time, I want to emphasize how impossible it is for anyone to really weigh the effect, as Trower says, of, quote, hundreds of years of being missionized, colonized, reservationized, mainstreamed, marginalized, and criminalized, and what effect this has on Indian self-regard. Intergenerational struggles tire a collective heart, but through incredible reinvention, Indian peoples have survived and even found ways to thrive. We must stand and wonder at the hearts and minds and souls it took to overcome and to stand up to what they have. Indian battles surely didn't end at Wounded Knee in 1890. They were only beginning. They will continue, and they will continue to change America. I pray this is what America will tell.